This program contains true stories of rescues. All of the 911 calls you will hear are real. Whenever possible, the actual people involved have helped us reconstruct the events as they happened.
This is 911. Do you have an emergency?
Chesterfield Emergency Service. They're in good hands here.
We begin in the British Columbia coastal mountains above Vancouver, Canada. On July 24th, 1990, 63-year-old Bud Reichman and his 15-year-old grandson David James set out on a hike. Some of the footage in this story was taped as events unfolded in the hours that followed.
Bud Reichman and his grandson David had hiked the trails in this area many times before.
I was to meet them at 7:30, so I headed up to Lions Bay. I wanted to arrive there about 7 o'clock, and I can just read until they come. So I settled down and I got the radio all set up to receive their message.
7:30, you better call Margaret.
Okay.
Call Grandma.
On this hike, Bud had brought a walkie-talkie so he could contact his wife Margaret. But when Bud tried to radio and warn her they would be late, he couldn't reach her.
Margaret!
7:30, there wasn't anything. It was just static. I couldn't get any reception at all.
Let's go down to the hill here. Find a clear area.
Fog was starting to roll in, and it would soon be getting dark. So they decided to leave the trail and cut across to another trail, further down the side of the mountain.
Grandma's going to be getting worried about this time. Watch your step through here. Just... Look out, Dave!
Please, say something! Say something if you're alive! Please! Anything! I'm scared! Please! Say something!
I thought there's no way he'll get out of this alive, but I thought I had to get down to him. I have to be as careful as I can because I'll break my neck too.
63-year-old Bud Reichman had fallen nearly 600 feet down the slope of the mountain.
My granddad was bleeding pretty badly when I first got down to him. Looked like every bone in his body was broken. I knew he was alive, but I didn't think he'd have much longer. First thing that came into my mind was, I gotta help him, I gotta do something to save his life. So I just took my jacket and slid it under his head and wrapped his head up. I said, if you can hear me, I'm going for help.
Okay, I'm gonna go for help. If you can hear me, try and hold this on tighter.
In my mind, I was saying, if there's a will, there's a way.
The dense fog was making it difficult to see, and the terrain suddenly got much steeper and rockier.
A couple times I'd slip. There was layer upon layer of rocks, and it would sort of crumble away, and I thought, I gotta stop hurrying because you're just gonna fall and kill yourself. I just couldn't go any further. All around me were cliffs. If I moved, I could slip right off and keep sliding right off the cliff and kill myself.
David's only hope for getting help was his walkie-talkie.
The knobs were broken, there was some sand and water on it, and I didn't think it was gonna work, but I shook it around and banged it around a little, thinking that let's hope it works.
anyone out there? Please, anyone! Mayday, mayday!
When we continue,
David! And they had the best looking for him. They heard his whistle. He's whistling like crazy, but they still couldn't locate him. It's like a needle in a haystack. David!
15-year-old David James was hiking with his grandfather when the older man slipped and fell 600 feet down the side of a mountain. When David went for help, he became stranded on a rocky ledge. All he had to rely on was a whistle and a walkie-talkie that might not be working.
but someone in a nearby town did manage to pick up David's call for help and pass word on to his parents.
He came across that he had picked up a message from my son, that he was lost in the mountains and that his grandfather was dead. And when I realized what mountains they're talking about, people die up there within sight of the city.
The North Shore Search and Rescue Team was called in to begin a ground search, headed by George Salahi.
We sent in one hasty response team from Cypress Bowl.
This looks like a good spot for a whistle check. David! David!
We also then had one of our other search masters with his truck, which had a CB radio in it, to try to make direct contact. And then the police phoned me back and told me that somebody in Horseshoe Bay was talking directly to the lad.
So, how many cars and people are at the headquarters to have to do with this?
Hey, you're pretty important in the middle of the night in Horseshoe Bay, let me tell you, guy. Everybody's rooting for you here.
Michael Berry had purchased a set of walkie-talkies only a few hours before he first heard David's cry for help.
It was just too coincidental for words. First of all, I've never, ever bought a pair of walkie-talkies, I don't think, in my life, and it happened to be that very day that I did. A very fortuitous buy.
They're gonna be up there soon. Hey, don't talk like that. Of course you will. You're only...
Around 2 o'clock in the morning, we suggested to David's parents that they should go down to speak to David, just to help calm him down.
How are you doing?
Terrible. I'm freezing cold, but I'm scared.
Pretty soon, David, pretty soon. Are you using your whistle once in a while?
Yeah, but I'm worried I'm behind rocks, but it's really hard for them to hear me.
Don't worry, just keep it up. Your mom wants to say hi.
Hi, honey.
Hey, I love you.
I love you too.
Did you don't get upset? Honey, don't know that for sure. Maybe just injured, so don't worry about that. We'll find you first, and then we'll take you back, okay? I saw his injuries, Mom said.
One thing he had emphasized was the amount of blood. So you start putting two and two together in your head, and the little bit of hope that you have dwindles.
But the trouble is, honey, we don't want your batteries to run out. We gotta make this short and brief, okay? And you gotta keep blowing on that whistle and just stay calm, okay?
And look to the sky. The lights.
You gotta look to the sky for the lights too, David. It's really important, okay? I love you too, sweetheart.
We had the assistance of the BC Ferries, and we used their spotlight, which we use for pinpointing the boy.
Hi, David?
Yeah?
Okay, we're scanning the lights again, okay? So we know it's still foggy up there, but we're still going to scan it. So you tell us, give us a shot if you see anything.
Okay. What light? What light?
When David came across the walkie-talkie and said, yeah, the light's right on me, but by the time that message was relayed to the ferry, the light had moved, and they never did get that light back on him, and that was like your heart sinks. And they had the best looking for him, and hours later, even with the walkie-talkie and pretty well knowing where he was, they couldn't find David. They heard his whistle. He's whistling like crazy, but they still couldn't locate him. It's like a needle in a haystack.
David was forced to spend the night on the mountain. The searchers hoped that by daybreak, the fog would clear enough that helicopters would be able to join in the search.
David, it'll be no problem getting on it. No problem at all.
By the following morning, David's walkie-talkie batteries were running low, and his signal was fading. His uncle, John Reitman, tried to maintain contact with him.
David's radio was getting pretty weak, and the search and rescue guys knew he'd need it to bring the helicopter in. So I took off down the highway until we got to Newman Creek, and David's signal got pretty strong there, so we knew he was up above us. Okay, this is the way they want you to do it. Either up the hill or down the hill, and left or right as you're facing down the hill. As you're looking towards the water, do they have to go left or right? And do they have to go up or down? Left and down. Yep. Don't panic, David. They'll just keep circling around until they lock right in on you. Don't worry. The helicopter went right over top of him a couple times, and David was getting a little freaked because he could see it go by, and it didn't stop. And his batteries were just about gone.
I can't hear you, David. Keep trying. Try spelling it, David. Try to spell it.
My right.
5240, parents say my right.
Can you see the chopper right now? Yes.
He's right above you, what? So stop there?
We got him.
They got you, pal. They got you.
All right.
They see ya.
The last thing we heard was the copter pilot saying, "We have visual." I yelled, "David, that's fantastic." He was gone. I mean, that was it. There was no batteries left.
After 13 hours stranded on the mountain, David was airlifted out to where his family was waiting for him. He was then transferred to a second ambulance and taken to a nearby hospital where he was treated for mild hypothermia.
Just seeing him flesh and blood, and all his fingers and toes are there, and give him a big hug and say thank God.
I was lucky that I got the radio to work.
It was tough to get him to go to the hospital. He was going to go back up. He was going to find his grandfather.
The search then focused on finding Bud Reitman.
Finally, the small helicopter snuck out from where we were, went back to Newman Creek. They took quite a risk to get into the area because they were basically dodging the clouds and the fog, and it was fairly windy at that time, too.
Within 2 hours, David rejoined the search for his grandfather.
I got back to the mountain, and the first thing I did was I went in, looked at the map, figuring I knew where he was. Maybe I can help out.
David's directions were passed to the 2 helicopters, while the ground search continued below, including volunteer Bob Charters.
We continued until finally the terrain became so steep that we had to start fixing ropes and rappelling down the ropes. We heard the smaller helicopter, a little Bell 209, above us, and they spotted us and said they could see our climbing rope through the trees. And then there was a pause, and then they said, "Holy smokes, we see him down below you." Another pause. "My God, he's waving at us." When we heard that, it was just like a shot of electricity went through the whole group. I saw Bud. He looked up. He could see me. He couldn't move. I just yelled out to him, "I'm with the North Shore Rescue Team. We're going to get you out of here as soon as possible."
Bud, how you doing? Hey, don't move.
He looked up at me, and the only thing that he asked me that he wanted to know was how David was.
Nearly 19 hours after he fell down the mountain, rescuers finally reached Bud Reitman.
He'd been through a horrendous fall, a very tough, cold night, and he's well on his way to severe hypothermia at that point. But Bud seemed to have a real spirit. He just seemed to be a real gutsy kind of a guy, and it's obvious that he had no intention of packing it in up there.
Word of Bud's rescue was relayed to his family.
He's waiting. Yeah, they said he...
Oh, that's great news.
By the time I walked back, they said, "Good news, he's moved his arm. That means he's alive." I thought, okay, this is perfect.
Feel good?
Very good job, David. Thanks.
Luckily.
Thanks a lot.
He was transported to Vancouver General Hospital, where Dr. Ron Walls headed up the trauma team that treated him.
We got a call from the paramedics saying that they were bringing in by helicopter a man who had fallen over 600 feet. When I heard that and knew it was on the North Shore Mountains, which are very rugged, I was expecting to find a patient who would be basically unsalvageable. But when they brought Mr. Reichman in, what we were surprised to see was that he was awake and cooperative and actually very lucid and had no evidence of a significant head injury. It was remarkable to go through his x-rays in sequence and find essentially not a single significant injury. Chest looks good. This is a sleeping bag over here.
He's built like an ox, so I guess we shouldn't have all been so surprised that he came out of it okay. Maybe the other way around. Maybe we should have been surprised if he had come out of this dead rather than alive.
So if you take that now and aim it. If I had been conscious to see him climb down there unassisted, without ropes, without anybody to help him, would have just killed me to begin with. But the fact that he got there and he remembered all the things that we had talked about under this kind of stress, it just absolutely delighted me, because I think that most kids his age would have been inclined to panic.
I want to thank the search and rescue people, the West Van Police, everybody who was involved. There was nobody who really didn't put a huge effort into it. It was great. I can't thank them enough.
What happened on that mountain has changed my life in that I would never go off the trail for any reason unless I had proper ropes or things like that. I feel good about myself because everything turned out for the best. I'm just happy that it's over with and my grandfather's okay.
Yes, he's a delight to have around, and we've been very close to him since he was born, really. And of course he has his friends and all these other things, but he always has a little time for his old grandpa.